Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jackie Franchuli for Wahoo's 24/7, and it's a good Thursday for Virginia. They are 1-0 in this season. They beat Richmond 34-13, and they're looking to go 2-0 in the year when they journey to Wake Forest for their ACC opener. If they do go 2-0, that is the first time they will do so in the Tony Elliott era. They have not won an ACC opener since 2020. So Virginia is looking to end some streaks there by going 2-0. Virginia is going to have a tough test against Wake Forest, but it is a winnable game for the Cavaliers. During my preseason podcast, I did mention that I felt like Wake Forest, don't want to say it's a must-win game, but in the first 5 games, Virginia probably needs to win 4 out of the first 5 games in order to have a shot at a bowl game. So before we start talking about Wake Forest, let's look back a second in that win over the Spiders. Now, Virginia had not only had to win, but they had to win pretty convincingly for the fans and also just people around the program to feel like this program is moving in the right direction. I think they did that. You know, when you look at the game, you saw a quarterback in Anthony Calandra that seemed to have a good command of the offense. He also seemed more mature. We've mentioned the maturity in either the coaches' interviews, but also in the preseason podcast and in our writing. And you got to see that out there on the field. He finished 17 of 23 for 297 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also ran the ball 11 times for 49 yards and 1 touchdown. What you got to see is what he brings to his legs, his ability to extend plays. But when he's scrambling, not only is he, obviously staying alive and keeping the momentum there, but he's also looking downfield so that he can see that open receiver. And you saw that a few times in the game. And I believe it was I think it was in the third quarter when he hit Sadarian Harrison for a first down. So he kept plays alive. And his ability to keep his eyes on the field is it's what makes him different, right? He can extend those plays and give Virginia a chance to move those chains. He also showed that he is willing to run out of bounds, and he's also willing to slide. That is also a sign of a young quarterback maturing. On the other side, he does still show some areas where he is still learning. For example, in the game, he had an opportunity at 1st and goal, but then he held the ball on too long. Instead of either throwing it away or sliding or going out of bounds, he went from 1st and goal to 2nd and 27 after he was sacked. And then Virginia ultimately had to settle for a field goal. So obviously there's things that this team will still learn. I mean, it's still the first game, but the good thing for Virginia, they still have time. Now, the other parts that we saw was Kobe Pace. It was a good running day for Virginia. He had 93 yards. Malachi Fields had his first 100-yard career day for Virginia and had that great catch where he looked like he was flying as he leapt to get that 41-yard reception. And you also had other playmakers like Trell Harris pop up, Jack Greasy pop up, Tyler Neville. You had a lot of other guys who show that they can contribute on the offensive side. And Virginia can have an explosive offense, having 7 plays of over 30 yards. So this is a Virginia offense that has explosive playmaking abilities. They just have to convert on those. There was a couple drops in the game with Sackett Wood having one in the red zone that had a scoring opportunity there. They had to settle for a field goal. And obviously, Chris Terry didn't have his best game with a few drops. But again, you have to look on the other side of this with Chris Terry, for instance. And I think Tony Elliott also mentioned this, and so did Des Kitchings. He's, obviously a guy coming back to his home state, playing in front of his family, probably for a big contingent of his friends and family coming from the 804 over to Scott Stadium. So there's a lot of pressure when you come home like that. So you can also obviously just shake it off. He's obviously proven that he can do it in the college level. Sometimes games like that happen. So there's nothing to really look too far into in that way. Offensively, the only thing that you still see from the team that you want to see them improving, and obviously that will take time too, is those missed opportunities. Against Richmond, they didn't kind of bite you. So you want to see them take advantage of those missed opportunities, those drops, those red zone opportunities, and also your third downs. There were 3 of 11 on third downs and 1 of 3 on fourth downs. Those are the things that you want to see this team progress. Again, it's the first game, but these are the things that you want to see how this progresses, especially in the next game in the ACC. What was good to see offensively too was how the offensive line played. I think it was nice to see Jack Whitmer out there. Obviously, Mikhail Belly didn't play. Jack Whitmer, 18 months ago, got a conversation from Des Kitchings where he said, "Hey, how about you move to the defensive line?" And he worked his way, added significant weight, according to Des Kitchings, and now started for them at left tackle. And he did a good job considering that Pro Football Focus actually rated him the fourth best player on the offensive side of the ball for Virginia. If you look through our PFF grade story on Sunday, we posted every Sunday after a game day. Blake Steen and Jack Whitmer were the two best offensive linemen according to PFF. Jack Whitmer graded out at 73.7. And, both Kitchings and Elliott said, you don't want to be a guy standing out if you're on the O line. And he didn't. He did his job. So it'll be interesting to see how he handles a more disruptive defensive line against Wake Forest. Virginia is still expecting Mikhail Bullock to be day to day, but from what Des Kitchings alluded to on Wednesday, it is more than likely that Jack Whitmer will play. So that's something to look out for. But at least Virginia knows that they have a guy that could be there if Virginia needs him to. And that's the good thing for that game against Richmond, because they did have the ability to have other O linemen take snaps, like Jimmy Christ. He also had an ability like Ugana Nana. They had different combinations there. Ethan Sipe. They had a lot of guys kind of step in and not stick with that starting five, which they do need in a season that is very long. You want some alignment there, just in case if there's other injuries there. That was good to see. Also, Xavier Brown coming back healthy. He adds some good versatility to that running back room. Also, a good asset on special teams. And we'll talk a little bit about special teams in a little bit, but obviously a good asset for Virginia to have Xavier Brown healthy in that running back room as well, joining Kobe Pace and Jack Gracie as obvious choices there. Now, defensively, again, a good performance. Honestly, it was nice to see Antonio Clary back in that backfield. The first thing he did was have that really good hit on the Richmond running back. And then 2 plays later, had another hit, which allowed Virginia to force them to go 3 and out. So that was a good play to set the tone. And we actually have a feature on Antonio Clary that's going to be available on Thursday afternoon. And it's a story about his recovery from injury, kind of getting a perspective from his family. And it was pretty neat because speaking with Antonio's brother, Dominic Banker, Dominic was saying that he was watching the game from Jacksonville, Florida, and he was sitting on the couch with his 2-year-old daughter sleeping next to him. And then when Antonio Clary had that hit, he yelled so hard that his daughter woke up. He got himself trouble with his wife, but he said it was a relief and so nice to see Antonio Clary kind of get that start, because it has been a long journey. He hasn't been playing football. He hasn't been on that field at Scott Stadium for almost 2 years now. Last time he played was in October of 2022, I believe, was the last time he stepped foot in that field of Scott Stadium. So he's had a rough few years dealing with some adversity. Last year, he had an ankle injury that sidelined him. Eventually, he had surgery on his ankle. So he's excited to be back on the field, and he decided to come back to Virginia for his final year of eligibility. So again, it was good to see him. And honestly, it just proved that secondary for Virginia is pretty strong when you look at it. Him and Jonas Sanker led the way in tackles. You would hope your linebackers will lead your way to tackles eventually, but it was a good game. Antonio Clary also had a quarterback hurry in the game. Cam Robinson and James Jackson were 2 guys that I felt like stood out in the linebacker room. They both did their jobs correctly. Richmond had 147 yards on the ground, 257 yards total on offense, and finished the game 3 of 15 on third down. The only thing on defense, and again, they kind of ran a vanilla defense, so that's why we're not doing a complete in-depth look in the game like I normally do in this, where I might show like video clips, and we'll probably start doing that more next week after the game against Wake Forest, is because they kind of ran more of a vanilla defense. So it's hard to really judge a lot of this, especially when you look at them only recording 1 sack. When you look at the defense they ran against Richmond and how many guys they sent forward, you think that okay, that they're not going to be doing that against Wake Forest. So they didn't give the pressure that I thought they would get against Richmond, and that was a point that I made in my 5 takeaways. But seeing some of the clips, you go, okay, well, they ran more of a vanilla defense, and you expect them to run more things against Wake Forest, especially with that veteran offensive line that Wake Forest has, and especially with a more, I want to say, more one-dimensional quarterback that Hank Buckmeyer will be for the Deacons. So that's when you hope to see more pressure. And with a guy like Cam Butler, who led the team in sacks despite missing most of last season, him being back, you could see that that is a possibility. So more pressure is what you want from this team moving forward. But there's a lot of good pieces on this team. I did like seeing Kempton Shine and Jam Jackson at corner. It seems like even looking at depth chart leading to Wake Forest, they have cemented their spots in the starting lineup for Virginia at the moment. So again, defensively, they did their jobs. I think the big takeaway also in the game was it kind of took their monkey off their backs because they won that first game last year. Their first win came all the way in October against William and Mary. This is an opportunity for Virginia to kind of start on that momentum that they need. And the other big thing was they had a rain delay. I mean, I don't know how many of you probably, I know they were on my Twitter mentions about a rain delay against an in-state opponent that they were winning and then having a rain delay and kind of switched momentum. And I think having that monkey off their back, coming in after a rain delay and still performing and still getting the win and still showing that consistency, I think all that will certainly help this team, at least mentally, kind of shrug that one off, right? Because sometimes you have things that are still lurking in your mind. And football can be is obviously a physical sport, but it also is a mental sport as well. So you take one thing off of that, I guess that the thing that's lurking in the back of your mind about that rain delay last year. So this is a good mental leap, as you can describe it, for Virginia. But yes, they'll be facing Wake Forest this week. Again, this is a big game for them. I've mentioned it a few times that I think Wake Forest, I don't like calling it a must-win game, but it's a very important one. This is a very important section of Virginia's season, and it's hard to say that when it's only game 2, but the way Virginia's schedule is lined up, winning 4 of the first 5 games gives them a very good likelihood at a bowl. And also it helps them out when you have Maryland at home next week, right? Because if you start 2-0 and you win that first ACC game, you don't make that Maryland game the must-win game. You kind of take off a little bit of your pressure as you go to game 3. Because if you do not win at Wake Forest, that game of Maryland becomes vastly more important. And then the game at Coastal Carolina becomes vastly more important. And then the game with Boston College at home becomes vastly more important. So a win against Wake Forest will certainly help the momentum in Virginia. Again, it's weird to say how important a game is in the first 2 games of the season, but just again, when you're finishing the season at Pitt, SMU at home, and at Virginia Tech, I mean, it's a hard ask for anyone. And at Notre Dame, and then you also have at Clemson as well. So it's a tough second half of the schedule. So Wake Forest, this is a program that has some of the same limitations as Virginia as far as recruiting and the transfer portal with the academics, and just how Dave Clawson has kind of built the program. Tony Elliott said on Tuesday during his press conference, it is the way that he hopes to kind of accomplish to kind of create the program and set some of the same accomplishing goals that Clawson has done. I mean, Clawson has done a good job of just having a stable program. You could have ups and downs when you're more developing program, but of course he's had some successes. So Tony Elliott even said that he thinks this game is a possible game to see where this program stands.
I think this is a great test from a program standpoint. Since I stepped into this role, I tell you, Dave Clawson has been awesome. Just to watch his leadership, at the coaches level in the ACC, with the way he conducts himself, the way he leads meetings, and then, I've been able to have conversation with him, and you look at what he's been able to do with that program. The amount of wins, in this conference is up at the top. In terms of the last 10 years or so. So, for us, I think it's a program, type of game, because we get to evaluate where we are, because they play extremely hard. They're very, very well coached. The guys have a lot of confidence. They understand the identity of who they are, and those are all things that we're trying to establish here. And in terms of our team goals, our second goal is to win the ACC opener. So it's extremely important to us to win the first game in conference.
So yeah, that was Tony Elliott. He spoke to the media on Tuesday, and he talked about the Deacons and what type of challenges they present with the slow mesh offense. And that it's not a triple option, but is very different. You don't meet that type of offense very often. So he talked about the challenges that presents. And when you look at this Wake Forest squad, yeah, there's some question marks on offense. Can they protect their quarterback on the offensive line? They're a more veteran team this year. Obviously, they return a very talented running back in Claiborne, someone who's very familiar with Virginia, and UVA fans are very familiar with him since he was a highly sought out recruit in the state of Virginia. He visited UVA a number of times during the last year of Bronco Mendenhall's tenure at UVA. He's also cousins with Cam Robinson. So obviously there's a little bit of a connection there for Virginia and Wake Forest. On defense, though, that is where I'm keeping my eyes out for them because they have a very disruptive defensive line. So a true test for Virginia's O-line that has more experience this year. Another test for Anthony Calandria. So although this game is obviously going to be won in the trenches, and I think the key battle will be that O-line for Virginia versus Wake Forest defensive line. Can Virginia establish the run quickly? And can the Virginia's defense stop Claiborne and Wake Forest run game to make them one-dimensional? So we're going to take a quick break, but on the way back, we're going to have a special guest on the show to help take a look at what Wake Forest can offer. And welcome back to the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jack French, for Wiles 24/7. And like I said before the break, we were going to have a special guest. And we have Demon Deacon Digest's Cameron Lemons Debro to come here to discuss what Virginia should be expecting from Wake Forest, kind of get an inside scoop on the Deacons. It's been a while since we've seen you, Cam. I think last time we had you on the show was about realignment and ACC realignment and all the rumors going about it.
Oh dear Lord, that is a dark day that I keep waking up to that nightmare. Keep waking up to that.
Well, it's the ACC, the teams that have filed a lawsuit against the ACC are currently 0-3.
Good. You know what? I honestly don't even I feel a little bad about Clemson because they've been kind of nice about it. I have no sympathy for Florida State. I've got no sympathy over there. So
yeah, it's definitely added a little bit more drama to the beginning of the ACC season, which both Wake Forest and Virginia are going to start ACC play on Saturday. Now, when you first look at this matchup, Cam, what is the first thing that you thought of when you looked at Virginia and Wake Forest?
Well, so you mean before the season or
before the season,
on Monday?
Yeah, just before the season.
Before the season, I thought that it was going to be a pretty important game for both teams. From the Wake side of things, after this game, Wake plays 3 out of their next 4 games. They host their homecoming against Ole Miss. They then host Louisiana. They have bye week and then host Louisiana. And then they get Clemson to go at the host Clemson to go to Raleigh to play NC State. I was like, oh no, you got to win this game because this is just you don't want to start off 1-1. I mean, obviously chalking up a win of NCNT. You want to start off 1-1. And then I looked at UVA's schedule and I went, oh no, theirs is worse. And it's worse in the sense of I think the first 5 or 6 games, it's like okay, yeah. There's a fighting chance for UVA, who I thought was going to be a better team. Like in my own power ratings that I do, I have them as a pretty decent better team this year than I did at the end of last year. But that back end of the schedule is just so difficult, and there's just a bunch of games that you just don't really love to have. And it's like, okay, UVA's got to start off really, really strong. And then so I was like, and I think that hasn't really changed through after both of our games on Thursday and Saturday, respectively, of both these teams, I think, understand that this is a game that they got to win.
Yeah, that's exactly when you look at the schedule for Virginia. When you look at the first 5 games, you're thinking, all right, Virginia, if they want a bowl game, probably realistically need to win 4 out of the first 5 games. We kind of figured they would be coming into this game 1-0. Both teams would be coming 1-0. So this is an excellent opportunity for them to create some momentum. Well, both teams to create some momentum. And this is going to be Virginia's first road game of the season. Playing against a team they have not had much success in recent years. But this is going to be an interesting matchup because although they haven't played each other in quite a few years, two people on either side of the sideline know each other very well.
Very
We
well.
talked to John Rudzinski today, and he knows quarterback Hank Backmeyer pretty well.
Very, yeah, no, I was digging into that on Monday, and I was like, there's no way that like Rudd's been there for like that long. And I was like, oh yeah, he was at Air Force, and I was like, wait a second. And I looked back and saw that Hank's actually, 1-1 against him. Played him his freshman year at Boise State, and played him again his junior year. Both, I think the second one was, I think it was the last second interception that Air Force won. The first one, I think, was Hank Bachmeier's highest graded game against the FBS opponent per PFF. And so it's one of those things of like, oh wow, this is really interesting. And obviously Wake Forest loves to recruit out of the Virginia area. Demond Claiborne, who's a staple. So I'm so sorry, UVA friends, but he's a staple of the Wake Forest offense. Taylor Marin from Centerville. Actually,
Cousin to Cam Robinson.
yeah, Cam Robinson. You also have Nick Anderson, from Virginia. Wake Forest has a lot of Virginia people, and obviously Virginia recruits down in the state of North Carolina as well. So this is a lot of, I feel like, old faces coming across from each other, and Dave Clawson has a lot of respect for Dabo Swinney. He definitely has a lot of respect for Tony Elliott. They played against each other since Dave got to the ACC, and so this is a fun little reunion that I think might add a little more to the stress we see on Saturday.
Yeah, Virginia head coach Tony Elliott had a lot of respect for what Clawson is able to do at Wake Forest and said it's kind of like what they hope they can accomplish at UVA, kind of build the program in that same way. So a lot of respect between both of the staffs. And Virginia, even has said that this game is what they will consider as to figure out where their program really stands. It's a good barometer for this program. So they understand the support and importance of the matchup, but also the respect that these two staffs had. But kind of going back to Bachmeyer, what does he bring to for this offense? What I know, obviously, they're going to have the same offensive system that Wake Forest is known for, but what does he bring individually to this offense?
I mean, the big thing right now is experience. When you looked at Wake Forest offense, and not just Mitch Griffiths, who just didn't have it last year. A lot of what plagued Wake Forest last year was experience, and now they return a lot at you have Donovan Green coming back, Taylor Marin coming back, pretty much their entire offensive line is coming back, and Demond Claiborne got some reps as well. But you really look at quarterback, and they brought back Michael Kern. But the one thing that they really, really wanted in the portal out of quarterback was experience. And Hank Bachmeier's been around since 2019. So that he's been around the block a couple of times. He's been around, two different schools. He was at Boise State, then went to Louisiana Tech. And when you talk to him, you get the sense of like, this dude's just confident. He's confident in what he can do, and even sometimes the things that he can't do. And that was something through fall camp that was a little bit concerning, and why I think a lot of us thought, rightfully, that Michael Kern would be the guy to take the first snaps against North Carolina A&T. Obviously, Kern had some plays that just didn't break his way. He wasn't bad. PFF didn't grade him. I think it's like close to an 80. He was fine, had some bad breaks, and then Hank comes in, and you just kind of felt like things were different with Hank. You felt like, okay, like he's been in the situation. The lights aren't too bright for him. And obviously it's the caveat, it's North Carolina A&T. But when you go through his games and you go through his PFF stuff as well, and everyone's like, he's just a solid quarterback. He has some throws that he would love back. He gets punished really, really badly when he tries to make tight window throws. But I kind of want that out of my quarterback. I want that guy that thinks he can make every throw. Sure, it's going to lead to a couple of interceptions here and there, but that guy has to be the leader. That guy has to have the confidence. And I think you can tell off the bat with Hank Bachmeier that like he just is a gamer. And I think that's really, I don't really love those sort of descriptions, but I think that's just the best way to describe him. Like when the lights come on, it goes, Hank's like, I am ready to go.
And I think the key for Wake Forest, I mean, both keys, honestly, for both teams is going to be in the trenches. So
Yeah.
as far as on the O line, what improvements have you seen?
I thought I don't think they graded out that great in run blocking, but I thought they were much, much better. Run blocking, especially on short yardage. That really, really played Wake Forest last year. They had games against Virginia Tech where, guys didn't know what play they were running. Against Georgia Tech, they had, a right guard and a left guard that were just, no one knew what was going on. And it was like, that really hurt. They're trying to pass off blitzes, and someone would bring like not even that exotic of a blitz, and they don't know how to pass it off correctly. But I think now you have Devontae Green back, and he's playing left tackle. And they love what they have in the interior with Nick Sharp, Matt Golban, George Sell, who I know they're really, really high on George Sell, Luke Pettibone. Those guys now have, except for Nick Sharp, who had an injury in the second game, but three out of those four guys have a lot of experience. And they brought in Keegan Trost from Indiana State. He missed a lot of fall camp with an injury, but came back in and kind of got most of the reps against NCAA. So I'm kind of leaning towards he might be the guy that starts at right tackle, but it just is a more experienced team in terms of their blocking both in the run and the pass. And I think they graded out, I think, across the board extremely well in pass protection. It just felt like there was just less sloppiness. There was a couple penalties here and there. I'm willing to chalk up, a random false start to, jitters, but it just looked more competent, especially since compared to the last year opener where it felt like, can they really get things done, especially when it came to, 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2.
And then on the flip side, we're talking about the trenches. It feels like Wake Forest's D line is the strength on that side of the ball. We're turning a lot of veterans in that group. It feels like a battle that Virginia, if they want to succeed, this is the battle to keep an eye on between their O line and Wake Forest's D line. Would you agree that the D line is probably one of the strengths?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I came into the season thinking that it was going to be one of the best units, honestly, in the conference. I mean, when you return to Sheen Davis, who turned down the NFL to come back for his year, Kevin Pointer, who was named one of Philpin's freaks. You got back Bryce Gannis, who there's like a whole thing with Wake Forest, and I'm sure it's the same thing at UVA, where you bring these guys up from the FCS. He came from Villanova. And that first year in the program, they're probably fine, solid people. But when they get to that second year, that's when they really take that jump. And we've seen that a lot at Wake Forest. So he's back for a second year. Kendron Wayman's in his fourth year in the program. And so it was really like, yes, this is what I think is supposed to be, this one of the strengths of the team, or not just the defense, but of the team in general. And then they come out against, a not great FCS team in North Carolina A&T, and I'm like, okay, like let's see what you guys can get there. And Shane Davis got his pressures, Kevin Pointer's got his pressures, but they were just getting gashed on the ground. In the first half, both the first team and the second team gave up over 5 yards per play. In the second half, then and Kevin Pointer kind of admitted that after the game that they kind of didn't take it seriously. Second half, the second team still gave up a lot of yards on the ground. But when I went back and charted it, there were 14 plays where half or more of the defensive line was the first team defensive line. They gave up 1.73 yards per play. A lot better of an outcome there. And so I think when you're going back and watching things, it's like, okay, you see the yards that were put up and the defensive line didn't get as well of a push as you thought all game. It's a lot better when you look at it saying, okay, after the first half, that first team did what you expected. And so it's hopeful that that's what continues versus what happened in the first half.
And kind of going from there, what does Wake Forest need to do? What are their keys to the game if they were to get that first ACC win of the season?
And keep the ball moving. One big thing that harmed Wake Forest last year was one, turnovers. That obviously it was just drive killers, but two, they would just find themselves in these 3rd and 7s, 3rd and 8s, like 4th and 5s. And those aren't drives you win on. Like you need to be in these 3rd and 2s or 2nd and 2s. Yeah, the best third down is a third down you don't face. Can you get to 3rd and 1, 2nd and 2, and just keep the chains moving? Every play doesn't need to be an explosive play. If you get it, great. But can we just keep the ball moving and keep being on schedule? I think on offense, that's going to be important. I think that's why they've put so much of an emphasis on being a better run team. And so far, the results are really good. Damon Claiborne is arguably the best running back Wake Forest has had ever. Definitely with Dave Clawson, but ever. And then defensively, it's not letting the ball get over your head. They really think that what happened last week, especially in the first half, was just really a blip on the radar. If you can tackle like you did in the second half of that game, they didn't let the ball over their head, and that's something that would really hurt them the last couple of years. And they were a little bit of, hey, we need to make sure we're protecting our corners. But if you can keep getting Virginia into and take advantage of offensive line that's still a little bit patchwork, and I think the offensive line's better for UVA. But if you can start keeping them in these 2nd 7s and 3rd and 7s, and get some negative plays, then you start feeling really, really good about your chances, even with a guy like Anthony Colandrea, who's dangerous on 3rd and 1, and he's dangerous on 3rd and 18.
Yeah, no, it feels like Virginia and Wake Forest have sort of the same keys to the game here,
Yeah.
with kind of the same question marks too, with both of them having more experience on the defensive line, but not playing like you expected in that first game. The O line still are better this year, but still some questions about
Right.
if that offense can sustain drives. Obviously, Virginia had explosive plays, but you want to stay on the ground a little bit more and take advantage of the opportunities. And it looks like Wake. So they both have the same keys to the game. And pretty much you're describing what Virginia is hoping for. So when you look at kind of the matchup, and I am going to put you on the spot there, even when you made Virginia fans very, very sad mentioning Claiborne, because that
Oh,
was a recruitment that Virginia fans were very disappointed, considering he visited, I think, 2 times
he did.
when he was committed to Wake Forest, that lead up to that last season. Um, who do you think will win on Saturday?
I mean, right now I have to trust the numbers, and my numbers have this as a slight Wake win. I think it's around like 4 points whenever I do. I think it's a very much Spider-Man meme sort of game. Like just at every single position, I think it's like it is a very clean carbon copy of each other. But I think I'm going to trust a hometown team on in a games like this. I usually do. But I think they're just being a little more experienced with Wake Forest and having just more experience with guys like, I mean, Hank Bachmeier's back. There's Donovan Green being back is massive. We saw last week, he's just a difference maker. And I think, comparing him to Malachi Fields is really fun. But I think they still also have Taylor Marin, who's very experienced and showed what he can do. Deuce Alexander's back and has another year underneath his belt. They were really high on Marco Morel. Horatio Fields has looked really, really good. Obviously it's been only a game, and they have Demond Clay. I just think there's just so many weapons, and I'm just really not sure about that UVA O line just yet. I think they're better than last year, and I think that's a really, really good step forward for Tony Elliott and UVA in general. I'm just very much I don't know if especially if Mikhail Boley is, he's day to day. We don't know if he's going to play. If he does, I think it's definitely a boost to UVA. But if he doesn't, I think they're just going to line up a first team All ACC, second team All ACC guy and Justine Davis and just say, go feast there. And he had 6 pressures, which was second across all P4 defenders in general last year. I see a little head popping up.
She
But
wants to
just
make her she wants to pick Wake Forest and between Virginia.
there we go.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you have Justine Davis, and I think, that's a matchup I think Wake Forest is really going to try to exploit. They have a good defensive line that's known to get pressure. I think they're going to try their best to attack that.
No, I agree. Like you said, it is a Spider-Man meme. So this is Elena. So she's just
Hi,
gonna
Elena.
go into the podcast. Elena, who do you think is gonna win, Wake Forest or Virginia? Don't know. All right. Would you pick the team that has a gold helmet, or would you pick the team that's gonna wear all whites? Don't know. Okay.
Oh no.
She's torn. So I'll break down the game with her later. But Cam, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks again for Cam for joining us in that interview earlier today that we recorded it. Probably should not record a podcast interview minutes before you're expecting your kids home. That was Elena that kind of joined in our podcast. She's still unsure who she's picking between Wake Forest and Virginia, but I am picking Virginia in my prediction. I had picked Virginia during my preseason predictions, thinking that they could win against Wake Forest. It's a very winnable game. Wake Forest didn't didn't blow anyone under the water last year, so I'm going to pick Virginia. I think the matchups are there. I think obviously the key matchup for them, like I mentioned earlier, is going to be that defensive line of Wake Forest and that offensive line for Virginia, making sure that they give Anthony Calandria enough time, but also giving Virginia that space so they can run the ball. But I think Virginia has enough to win this game and to become 2-0 going into this season. So I am picking Virginia. So, but again, thanks so much for Cam for joining us. And thanks you guys for listening to our podcast. Again, you can subscribe to Wahoo's 24/7 for your up-to-date news on what's going on around the Virginia program, especially with the game at Maryland occurring at Scott Stadium in 1 week, which is also set to be a big recruiting weekend. We've already started confirming visitors. That's on Wahoo's 24/7. We also have features on players and on a team available, and that's also on Wahoo's 24/7. And if you like the podcast, click on the channel on YouTube, like it, like this video, and also subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcasts. But for right now, I hope you guys have a good rest of your week and enjoy Saturday and the weekend.